All right, grade 10s. Let's continue on with our angle relations. To start with, we've dealt with angle relations for a couple of lessons now. You should have it all down pat, but very quickly, let's just consider we have to worry about the complementary angles rule. Two angles, total 90 degrees. That helps us calculate an unknown. The supplementary angles rule. We have a 180 degree angle. Well, if there's two of them, they have to total 180. That can help us calculate an unknown length. We had opposite angles. And opposite angles, anytime two lines intersect, angles across from each other are the same. We need to learn to recognize that. We talked about triangles briefly going back to previous courses you've been in math. We know that all triangles have to total 180 degrees for all angles. So if I know two of the angles, 180 minus the 2 gives us the third. All of these bits and pieces work together. Then we started talking about parallel lines and transversal. Parallel lines and transversals. Well, with that was the fact that anytime we have parallel lines and a transversal that cuts across it, we create four angles. We have to remember that angles in the same position, the top right angle and the top right angle, one could slide down onto the other. So we have the idea of corresponding angles are the same. Interior alternates, or what I called the Z rule, are the same angle. Inside the parallels, alternate sides of the transversal, these two angles would be the same. And likewise, inside and opposite sides of the transversal, these two angles would be the same. Remember, that's the idea of that Z rule I talked about. Follow a parallel, down the transversal, the other parallel. We create those two angles, they're the same. Z rule, follow a parallel, down the transversal, down the other parallel. We create these two angles. They're the same. So corresponding angles, interior alternate angles, all of these rules come together. So let's take a look at how this relates as we move forward. So we're now on page 27 of the booklets. Page 27 of the booklet. This first question, I'll be honest with you, there's not enough information. So I'm not worried about this question. Don't sweat it. You won't be tested on it. However, example 2. Now we start to get some questions that are a little bit more involved. You need to look for all these relations I just reviewed. So, different ways to approach the questions. But I believe I mentioned that I love the idea of these intersecting angles, lines for angles, because opposites are the same. So 87 degrees and M are opposite. We know that M is opposite the 87, so it's the same size, 87 degrees. Now, I really think that putting that value into the diagram can maybe help with other questions. Now, what about F? Well, talked about this, and this is one students miss a lot. F is on a straight line, and straight line means the angle's 180. So 87 and F are supplementary. And supplementary angles have to total 180. So F is going to be the 180 degree straight line minus the 87. Leaves us with 93 degrees. All kinds of bits and pieces. Now what about the N? How is the N left? Well, if we take a look, N is in a triangle. And that triangle always has to total 180. Well, we know two angles in there. A triangle must add up to 180. So N will be the 180 degrees total minus the two angles that we know, and we end up with N equaling 58 degrees. So these sketches start to have more and more pieces put into them, which makes them confusing, but they also give us more options. That's what's nice about it. We have options. Question 1 on page 28. Well, in this case, lots going on, but what do I hope you focus on? Is focused on the fact that we have parallel lines. It shows us parallel and parallel. And as soon as I have parallel lines, I want a transversal. Because a transversal tells me I have a whole bunch of relationships. For this first transversal, 115 is opposite A, so A is 115 degrees. 115, top left, corresponds to top left. That's 115. Well, these two are now opposite, so that's 115 degrees. Even if a question doesn't ask for a certain angle, but you can figure it out, do the work. Put it in there. What else do we know? We have a straight line there. And what do we know about straight lines? They're supplementary. So this angle here, because it makes a 180 degree angle, 180 minus 115 degrees, that gives us 65 degrees, which means the opposite to that is 65. The interior alternate, the Z rule. Look at the Z rule that happens. 65 and that angle are the same, and 65 is opposite that. So all of a sudden, I can fill in all the angles I need. Well, 80 is opposite 80, because what do I have? I have another transversal, another parallel line transversal situation. Opposites are the same. Interior alternates are the same. Opposites are the same. And I have a straight line here. So we know this is 180 degrees. So if this is 80, this has to be 100 degrees. And now opposites are the same, 100. Well, I have another straight line, 80 degrees and 100 degrees. Opposite, 100 degrees. All of these bits and pieces go together. Exact same idea with this last grouping. There's another transversal. So what do we have? 45 is opposite 45. Alternate interior, look at that Z that happens, 45. Opposites, there's 45. Straight line, this is 180 minus 45, 135 degrees. 135 degrees. 135 degrees, because bottom right here corresponds to bottom right angle, corresponding. 135 because it's opposite. So now you can identify angle W, YD. Well, first of all, that's 90 because they're parallel, so 90 degrees. YDA, Y to D to A. YDA, 115 degrees. D to E to B. So at this point, we have D. Let's see if I can use a D to E to B. Well, that's 80. D to E to B, 80 degrees. And E to F to S. Well, there's E to F to S is 45 degrees. So all kinds of relations happening there because of parallels and transversals. Number 2 and 3, 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D. Let's take a look. 2A. Well, again, busy. But look at these. We have parallel lines. Parallel lines and a transversal. Y, beside Y is this 110. That's going to correspond to the top left here. So that's 110 degrees. Now, this question doesn't actually ask for that angle, but I'm going to put it in because it might help me. Opposite 110. We know this is 110 degrees. Now, intersecting lines, 110. X is 110 degrees. All these little bits and pieces start to intersect. Now, where do you go from there? Well, start looking for relations. Well, what about y? If we take a look at y down here, straight line. Straight line means they're supplemental. 110 and 70 degrees gives us the 180 degree line. All kinds of bits and pieces. Now this 30 degree down here, kind of unique by itself, but it's with parallel lines. So opposites we know are the same. So that 30 degree angle, because it's opposite to the given 30, isn't asked for, but maybe it's going to help us. How is it going to help us? Well, all of a sudden, maybe you see that you have a triangle here. Look at this. We have a triangle. We have 110, we have 30, and we need to have this angle finish the triangle and total 180. 110 and 30 is 140, so that means this is 40 degrees. All sorts of relations. And this 40 degrees, look at this. It's made up of those two lines that intersect. 40 is opposite Z, so Z is 40. And now we're left with W. Well, W, a little bit tricky, but look here, 70. Interior alternate, the Z rule. So this is 70, and this whole thing has to be 70 because they're interior alternates. Well, if they both total 70, one of them's 40, W has to be 30. So all these little rules we've talked about, they all come together. That one's got a lot going on. C. C's an important one. You need to be familiar with it because it is two triangles, but we see parallel lines, and I like to extend them because even though it stops, I could look at these as parallel lines and a transversal. I can extend those. Is there information I can now do? Just focus on the red parallel and transversal. Well, what helps me here is hopefully you see again, look at the Z rule. Interior alternates. Alternate side of the transversal are the same. All these rules come together. Now up top, look at this. We have a triangle. 38 plus 32 is 70. Well, the three angles have to total 180, so X has to be 110. 70 plus 110 is 180. What else do I know? Well, opposites are the same, so I'm going to put 110 there just because it might help me. But what about Z? Well, Z's on a straight line with the 110, has to total 180. If this is 110, that last bit has to total 180, so Z is 70 degrees. And how about Y? Y is a couple different things, and that's what's great. You always have choice. But Y is actually on another transversal. So I see that what I have is I have the Z rule again, but a different transversal. 38, Y has to be 38 as well. The other reason it's 38 is all three angles in that triangle have to total 180, which they now do. So all these rules come together one after each other. You just need to be familiar with them in practice. So B and D, give them a try. Check the notes if you have to. We'll talk about these ones together in class. From there, that's what you're looking at, is different ways these things can be calculated. So from there, your assignment is going to be page 29 to 30. But on page 29, 29, don't worry about question 3. So don't sweat that. But everything else can be attempted. Reading the situations and seeing if you can adapt. And then after that, page 29 and 30, I want you to go to page 35C. So we got to scroll a little bit. 35C gives us some questions that are a little bit more complicated. So on page 35C, let's actually go to 35B and take a look at one. Page 35B and take a look at number 41. So let's take a look at that. 35B, number 41 real quick. Want to take a look at that. Make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. Again, triangles, which will probably be helpful, but I hope you notice sometimes these questions have the parallel lines. If we extend the parallel lines and look for a transversal, there's our first transversal. It creates 4 different angles. Are there any relations there that you see? It tells us that this is 65. Well, remember, corresponding top left angle is going to be the same as the top left angle on the same transversal. So we know that D is 65 degrees as well. All right, what else do I know? Well, using that same information, here's a straight line. And a straight line creates 180 degrees. So if this is 65, E is going to be 180 minus 65 degrees, which leaves us with E, which is 115 degrees. So E is 115. That helps us a whole bunch, I think. I'm just going to erase some of this so it's, well, no, I don't have to. Let's now look at the fact that these are parallel lines, and we have another transversal. Well, it's telling us that this is 115 degrees. Does that help us? Well, maybe it will. That means this is 115. Well, maybe it'll help us, maybe it won't. You have to figure out, because every question's a little different. But what we do know that this is 115, and I have a straight line. Another straight line, the idea of the supplementary, 115 and what? B has to be 65, because together they form a straight line. And if I have 65 here and 65 here, I have a triangle. So 65 and 65 is 130. 130 means A has to be 50 because that triangle has to total 180. So much going on in these questions. And then finally, to finish this off, we have the bottom 2. And the bottom 2 angles, well, what's the relation? Well, we already figured out that this D was 65. That's 65 degrees. Well, a couple different things. I see this great big triangle. The whole thing is a big triangle with 50 and 65. And so what would C be to make it a full triangle? Well, 50 and 65 is 115. 115 leaves us with C, which is 65 degrees. But that makes sense as well because there's my transversal. Top right angle, which is 65, matches up with the top right angle, which is also 65. All kinds of ways to look at this, but you need to practice to see how it all comes together. So again, your assignment for this lesson is to practice all these situations. Page 29 and 30 in the booklet. Also, page 35C, but omit. Do page 35C except these few questions. They're just using concepts that we don't need. 43, 45, 46, 49, 52, and 62. Those can be omitted, but you need to practice this. They get ugly, but they're still manageable if you practice. Have fun.